parenting as a codependent can be a way to continue the cycle of the dysfunction and codependency that you were raised with in your home. I'm Coach Kathleen, and I just wanted to share some thoughts on some things that were specific to me as a parent where I failed my daughter. And a lot of that had to do with, because of my codependency, it was important to me that I be seen as competent, that I be seen as a great parent. I wanted the recognition that comes with having a well-behaved child that reflects you and your family in a very positive way. We like people to see us as, the examples and that, that need to be perceived in a certain way that speaks to our need for affirmation, our need to be viewed as competent, as good, as, performing. Codependence can be very performance-based, as many of us know. So the issue is, we set way too high a standards for our children. We create a lot of anxiety and stress in them because we expect things from them that they, as children, cannot do. They cannot perform to the level of expectation. So when I was a child, my dad was a Marine. So he expected that if he said jump, boy, you better jump, right? So his expectation was that we were like little mini, recruits, that we did everything to his specifications, to his standards, and that if we ever failed in any way in his mind, that we were to be punished. So if you did something good or did something right, there was never praise given, because why wouldn't you? That's what's expected. You should get A's. You should, do your chores without being asked. You should do all the things. So there was never a situation where we just got praised or acknowledged or won any kind of attention from doing the right thing, because that was what was expected. But if we failed, and I use that word with a cringe because it really wasn't failing, but if we didn't live up to those high, just unattainable standards to his idea of what a child should do and say and be and look like, then there was punishment involved. So as a child, that can generate a lot of stress and a lot of fear. And so you become almost afraid to try, almost afraid to do things, almost afraid to have an opinion, have a thought, attempt anything, because you will be just crushed if you don't get it right perfectly the first time. So, being afraid to learn something new, if you messed up just trying to learn something new, it was being ridiculed or being yelled at or whatever. It just made you not really even want to try it. So as a codependent, we have to be really careful how we relate to our children and allow them to be children, allow them to fail, allow them to mess up. It's not the end of the world. If they spill their milk, kids are going to spill their milk. There's no point yelling at a child who just spilled their milk. They didn't mean to. I remember my dad one time saying, "What'd you do that for? What are you, stupid? Why are you going to spill your milk all over? If you pay attention, you wouldn't spill your milk," kind of a thing, right? Well, just being a kid, you're going to spill your milk. And so it's not the end of the world. There's nothing to yell at. There's no reason to make the child feel stupid or incompetent or unlovable because they spilled their milk, right? So I really want us to be very mindful and pay close attention to how we talk to our children and how we relate to them and how we allow them to be imperfect little humans, right? Because otherwise we create this just very stressful dynamic with our own children, which is so unhealthy and so makes it so much more difficult for them. As I do remember as a child, making myself very small. I didn't want to draw attention to myself because that typically meant, punishment or being yelled at or whatever. And so we weren't really allowed to have our own opinions. We weren't really allowed to say, I don't agree with that, or no, that's not what I want. So a child in that kind of environment learns very early not to have thoughts, opinions, wants, needs, and at the very most, don't express them if you do have them, right? So you don't ever want to say that out loud, because that will be met with a whole nother, level of anger and rage. Because my parents felt, I can't speak for how they felt, but my mom and I had some conversations, some healing conversations later in life. And she did feel very ill prepared for young children, and she felt ill prepared as a mom. It was expected of her, but she really didn't have a really strong, sense of what it meant to be a mom, because her mom was abusive. And so, and again, you can see I talked before in another video about generational curses. And these are the kinds of things that get passed down. So her mother, my grandmother, was abusive. My mother had started out being abusive when I was very young, but she, kudos to her, because this is in the early 60s where these things weren't really even talked about, recognized that her temper was causing her to abuse her children, to hit her children and hurt her children. And so she took it upon herself to try and figure out ways to curb her own temper. So God love her for that, praise her for that, because at least she figured some of that out. So by the time we talked, and I had figured some of these things out on my own, she and I hadn't actually talked about this before, and I started doing some healing work with Abby. She said, well, I was a better mom than my mom was, and you're a better mom than I was. So hopefully, we can keep passing this down until we break that generational, curse. And so it was really important that self-awareness is critical for healing and transformation. If you really, truly want to change, you have to be brutally honest with yourself, but you have to allow other people to also be brutally honest with you. Not everybody, but you need to pick a few people that can tell you the truth. And then you need to respond to that without anger or defensiveness. And that's difficult. But I will say that as I walked my healing journey, it became much easier for me to accept constructive criticism or feedback or insights from a few select people that I felt emotionally safe with. Because if you react with anger, denial, justification, or if you attack the other person, then there's just no point, because you're never going to change if you're not willing to hear it. So as a parent, this need to be perfect, where we jump down our children's throat every time they do something wrong or make a mistake, is very, very damaging. It's so damaging, and it screws them up. So now you're passing that along to them, and they're going to screw up their kids. So we've got to figure out a way to really do some introspection and figure out what we're doing that's damaging our children, and figure out ways to stop. There has to be a plan in place. We need something that's going to help us say, okay, kind of here's where we are, over here is where we want to be. How do we get there? What are the steps, to get us to that place? So there needs to be some kind of plan, which is why I really loved the Phoenix Rising workshops, because that's what I did. And that's how I transformed my life and made changes for myself. So I would love to see others do that as well. But this is just something that you can do for yourself if you want to truly begin to recognize ways that you can be a better parent, a better person, better spouse, better child to your parents, better friend, better employee, all the things in your relationships as a codependent. We need to understand why we have that drive for perfection, why it's so important to us that we appear to be competent and perfect to other people, because that drives our sense of worth, that we have this need to be loved and accepted. But not just love and accepted, but we need acclaim, we need acknowledgement, we need praise. And so it turns us into people pleasers, but also can turn us into tyrants to other people in our life, because we expect them to behave in ways that make us look good, right? So our spouses, our children, whoever it may be, we want to look good, and we need them to help us to look good. So we try to control them. We try to control the people and the situations, the circumstances in our life, which is impossible. You just can't control all of those things. And so it's just a never ending cycle of disappointment and demands and control and frustration and anger and all the things that go with that, trying to be in control of things that you're not in control of and shouldn't be in control of. So that is part of that healing journey, that process where we need to start examining ourselves and what's making us behave this way. What are some triggers for us? Where did this all come from? How do I break those habits, those bad habits that we've had probably since childhood? So I would love, love, love to help anyone on this path, on this journey, who also would like to heal from their codependency and be in better, healthier relationships. So let me know how I can help.